It's strange how the smallest moments can leave the biggest impact on our lives. When we're younger, we often look for grand gestures, for big changes that will make a difference. We chase after success, think that achieving big things will somehow bring fulfillment. But as I've grown older, I've realized that it's the small acts of kindness, the simple gestures, that really have the power to change lives. I remember a time, many years ago, when I was feeling lost, drifting through life, unsure of what I was meant to do or where I was headed. I had a job, a family, and the usual daily routine, but something was missing. I was going through the motions, trying to keep up with expectations, but I felt disconnected. Life had become a series of tasks to complete, rather than a journey to embrace. It wasn't until one seemingly ordinary day that I realized just how powerful the smallest act of kindness could be. It happened at a time when I least expected it. I was walking down the street, caught in my own thoughts, when I bumped into a woman who was struggling with her bags. She was older than me, probably in her late 60s, and her arms were full of groceries. Without thinking, I reached out and offered to help. It was such a simple thing, just carrying a few bags for her, but it changed everything for me. She looked at me with a smile that could light up a room and thanked me, and for a moment, the world seemed to slow down. We talked for a few minutes as I walked her home. She shared that she had been feeling isolated, that she had lost her husband recently and hadn't felt much of a connection to anyone. She told me about her life, her family, her love of gardening, and the way she missed having someone to share her days with. I didn't know it then, but that small act of helping her would end up meaning more to her than I could have ever imagined. We parted ways that day, and I didn't think much of it at first. I had done a good deed, but I didn't think it was anything extraordinary. But over the next few weeks, she would stop by my house every now and then, just to say hello, to chat about the neighborhood, to tell me about the new flowers blooming in her garden. And gradually, I began to realize how important that simple gesture had been, not just for her, but for me as well. That moment helped me understand something important. Kindness doesn't always need to be a grand gesture. It doesn't need to be something that changes the world. It's the small things, the everyday acts, that have the power to make the most difference. I had no idea that my helping her with her groceries would lead to a friendship that would continue for years. I had no idea that it would help me break free from the feeling of being disconnected and remind me that connection is built on simple moments. That experience stayed with me, and I began to notice how many small acts of kindness are happening around me every day. The neighbor who offers to help with the yard work, the colleague who picks up coffee for you when you've had a rough morning, the friend who sends a text just to check in, these are the moments that truly matter. These are the moments that make a difference, that shape our lives, even if we don't always see it in the moment. It's easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of life, to focus on the big things we need to accomplish, the goals we need to reach. But in doing so, we often overlook the simple, everyday acts of kindness that are right in front of us. We forget that a smile, a word of encouragement, or even just holding the door open for someone can change the course of their day. I began to make a conscious effort to embrace the power of these small acts. I made it a point to be kind, to listen, to offer help when I could. And what I found was that these simple gestures didn't just change the lives of others, they changed mine as well. They brought me closer to the people around me, helped me form stronger connections, and reminded me that life isn't about what we accomplish, but about how we treat each other. As I continued to embrace the power of small acts of kindness in my life, I began to notice a subtle shift in the way I viewed the world. It wasn't just about the impact I was having on others, it was about the way those small acts were shaping me as a person. When we think about kindness, we often think about the good we can do for others, but we don't always realize that kindness is just as much a gift to ourselves. It creates a sense of fulfillment, a connection to something larger than ourselves, and a feeling of joy that comes from simply being present for someone else. One day, I was at the grocery store, standing in line with my cart filled with the usual necessities. It had been a long week, and I was feeling a bit worn out from work and family obligations. As I was waiting, I noticed a woman ahead of me, struggling with her wallet. She looked flustered and embarrassed as she fumbled through her purse, trying to find enough change to pay for her groceries. I could see that she was stressed, and for a brief moment, I thought about ignoring the situation, just focusing on my own purchases and moving on. But something inside me told me to do otherwise. I walked up to her and offered to cover the difference. At first, she hesitated, insisting that she was fine. But I could see the relief in her eyes when I said, "It's really no problem. Let me help." And just like that, I paid the extra few dollars for her, and the weight of her worry seemed to lift. She thanked me profusely, and we exchanged a brief conversation, but what struck me wasn't the money, it was the way we had connected in that simple moment. She had been worried, and I was able to offer a small gesture of kindness that made a difference in her day. And in turn, it made a difference in mine as well. As I walked out of the store, I realized that these small acts weren't just about helping others, they were about shifting my perspective. We live in a world that often feels chaotic, disconnected, and fast-paced. We rush from task to task, always focused on what we need to do next, rarely stopping to appreciate the little things. But kindness, even in its simplest form, forces us to slow down, to be present, and to truly see the people around us. In that moment at the grocery store, I was reminded of something important. We're all just trying to get through life, and a little bit of kindness can go a long way in making someone feel seen, appreciated, and supported. The more I embraced these small acts, the more I realized how often they go unnoticed in our daily lives. A smile exchanged with a stranger on the street, a hand held out to help someone with a heavy bag, a kind word offered to someone having a rough day. These small moments don't always get attention, but they are what make the world feel warmer, more connected, and more human. They're what keep us from feeling alone, from becoming too absorbed in our own lives to notice the people around us. I started to make kindness a priority, not just as an act of generosity, but as a practice, something I could intentionally bring into my life every day. I didn't want to wait for big moments of impact or grand gestures. I realized that the true power of kindness lies in the everyday things, in the consistent effort to show up for others in small ways. Whether it's reaching out to a friend who's having a tough time, holding the door for someone, or offering a compliment, these actions don't just help others, they help me, too. They remind me of the beauty in human connection, and they help me stay grounded in what truly matters. One of the most beautiful things I've noticed is how kindness has a ripple effect. The more I gave, the more I saw others giving as well. It was as if my actions were inspiring those around me to be kinder, to be more present, to offer help when it was needed. I've seen strangers become friends simply by offering a small act of kindness, whether it was helping someone find their way in a crowded store or sharing a conversation with someone who was feeling lonely. And in those moments, I've realized that kindness is contagious. It doesn't just make the person on the receiving end feel better, it creates a positive energy that spreads out, touching others and creating a web of compassion that connects us all. It's easy to get caught up in our own struggles, to feel like we're too busy or too overwhelmed to help others. But what I've learned is that kindness doesn't have to take much. It doesn't require money or time, it just requires awareness. It requires a willingness to see others, to recognize their humanity, and to offer something that might make their day a little bit easier. And when you start doing that, you begin to see the world differently. You start to notice the opportunities for kindness all around you, whether it's in the form of a conversation, a helping hand, or a listening ear. And you realize that, in the end, it's these small acts that make the biggest difference. As I began to embrace small acts of kindness more deeply, I noticed something else. These acts weren't just transforming my relationships with others, they were also transforming my relationship with myself. It's funny how something as simple as helping someone else can make you feel better about your own life. When I helped that woman at the grocery store, or when I held the door for someone, or even when I just gave someone a compliment, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about recognition or praise, it was about the quiet joy that comes from knowing you've made someone's day a little bit better. I found that kindness had a way of lifting me up as much as it lifted others. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were days when I was tired, when I felt overwhelmed, when I wasn't sure if I had the energy to be kind to anyone, including myself. But even on those days, I found that the smallest acts could still have a big impact. A smile, a word of encouragement, a simple hello to a stranger, all of these tiny moments could turn a bad day around, not just for the person on the receiving end, but for me as well. The energy we put into the world, even in small ways, has a way of coming back to us in unexpected ways. It can lift us out of our own struggles and remind us that, even in the chaos of life, we are connected to others. I think one of the most powerful things about small acts of kindness is how they allow us to see the humanity in others. Life can sometimes feel isolating, and it's easy to get caught up in our own thoughts and worries. We may see someone on the street and pass by without noticing them, lost in our own world. But when we make the effort to stop, to smile, to offer a kind word, we are acknowledging that other person's humanity. We're reminding them that they matter, that they are seen, and that they are not alone in this world. And that, I believe, is a gift. One particular encounter stands out in my mind. I was sitting at a small cafe, enjoying a cup of coffee and catching up on a book I had been meaning to read. The place was relatively quiet, just a few people scattered around, but I noticed an older man sitting at the table next to me. He had a book in front of him, but he wasn't reading it. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, staring out the window. I could tell that something was on his mind, but he looked so isolated, so alone. I had no idea what had brought him there that day, what he was going through, but I felt compelled to do something. So, without much thought, I simply smiled at him and said, "Good morning." He looked up, startled, and then smiled back. That small exchange, just a simple greeting, seemed to break through whatever cloud he had been under. We started talking, just about the weather at first, and then about his book and his life. As he spoke, I could hear the years of experiences, the loneliness, and the longing for connection in his voice. We talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories about our lives, our families, our favorite books. When he left, he thanked me for the conversation, and I realized that sometimes, all it takes is a small act of kindness, a word, a smile, a moment of listening, to turn someone's day around. That small interaction had a ripple effect, not just for him, but for me too. I walked out of that cafe feeling lighter, more connected to the world around me. I realized that in taking the time to show kindness to someone else, I had reminded myself of the power of human connection. We can't always change someone's circumstances or solve their problems, but we can offer them something that matters, our presence, our time, and our attention. And that's the thing about kindness, it's not always about doing something big. It's about being present, being aware of the people around you, and offering what you can, when you can. Sometimes, the smallest acts, like listening to someone, offering them a compliment, or simply acknowledging their existence, can have the biggest impact. They can make someone feel less alone, less invisible, and more connected to the world around them. What I've come to understand is that kindness is a gift that we give to both others and ourselves. It strengthens the bonds we share with the people around us, and it reminds us that we are all in this together. In a world that can sometimes feel disconnected and overwhelming, small acts of kindness are a way of making the world feel more human again. They are a reminder that, despite our differences, we all share a need for connection, for kindness, and for the simple joy that comes from being seen and appreciated. So, I continue to make kindness a priority in my life, not because I'm trying to earn anything, not because I'm seeking recognition, but because I believe in the power of those small moments. They may seem insignificant, but they're anything but. They are the threads that weave us together, the small actions that create a ripple effect, and the foundation upon which a better world can be built. As I continue to reflect on the simple yet profound impact of small acts of kindness, I've started to see how these moments weave a fabric of connection that stretches far beyond just one individual. It's not always about the immediate results. Sometimes, the effects of kindness unfold over time, rippling through people's lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. And yet, Knowing that our actions, however small, have the potential to make a difference in someone else's day or life, that's something powerful. One of the most beautiful things I've learned is how kindness tends to come full circle. When you offer kindness to others, not only do you improve their day, but you're also creating an environment where kindness begets kindness. It's like lighting a candle. It may seem small at first, but once that light is lit, it can inspire others to do the same. I've seen it happen in my own life. There have been times when I was feeling down, when I was struggling with something, and just a small act of kindness, whether it was a simple smile from a stranger or a thoughtful message from a friend, completely turned my day around. It reminded me that no matter how dark things might feel, there's always a light of kindness somewhere, always someone willing to extend a hand, even in the smallest of ways. I remember a time when I was going through a particularly challenging period in my life. My job was stressful, my personal life was going through some shifts, and I felt like I was constantly running on empty. One day, in the middle of all of it, I found myself in a coffee shop, sitting down at a corner table to take a breath. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone or even be around people, but I noticed an older woman sitting at the table next to me, reading a book. She had a kind, warm face, and I couldn't help but notice that every now and then, she would glance up from her book and look out the window with a faraway expression, as if lost in thought. As I sat there, I felt an urge to connect, to break through my own isolation. So, I decided to do something small, something that might make her smile. I got up, walked over to her table, and asked if she would like me to refill her coffee. She looked up at me, a little surprised, but then she smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and lit up the room. "That would be very kind," she said softly. It was a small gesture, something I did without thinking too much about it. But as I handed her the coffee, she looked me in the eye and thanked me again. And then, she said something that stuck with me. She told me that she had been feeling quite lonely that morning, and that the simple act of kindness had made her feel seen, like someone had noticed her and cared enough to make a gesture. Her words stayed with me long after I left the coffee shop. It was a reminder that kindness doesn't always need to come in grand gestures. Sometimes, just acknowledging someone's presence, offering a small act of consideration, can make all the difference in the world. And often, we may not even know the full impact of our actions. I never saw that woman again, but I often think about that interaction. She was going through her own struggles, just as I was, and in that moment, a simple offer to refill her coffee turned into something far greater. It wasn't about the coffee, it was about the human connection. It was about sharing a moment, showing kindness, and making a difference in someone's day, no matter how brief. Since then, I've carried that lesson with me. I try to be more present for the people around me, even in the smallest ways. I hold the door for strangers, offer compliments when I can, and take a moment to listen when someone needs to talk. I've learned that kindness is not just a passive thing, it's an active choice. And it's a choice that we can make every day, in every interaction. It doesn't require anything extraordinary. It's about being aware of the people around us, understanding that everyone is carrying their own burdens, and offering a moment of light, however brief it may be. The beautiful thing about small acts of kindness is that they don't just change the person on the receiving end, they change us too. Every time we offer a kind word, a helping hand, or a moment of connection, we reinforce the goodness within ourselves. We remind ourselves that we are part of something bigger, that our actions matter, that we have the power to create positive change in the world. I've come to believe that kindness is one of the most powerful forces we have. It transcends time and space. It doesn't require wealth, fame, or status. It doesn't need to be loud or extravagant. It's the small, everyday actions that truly matter. The world may be full of challenges, and people may sometimes feel distant from one another, but kindness brings us together, reminds us of our shared humanity, and shows us that we don't have to do something grand to make a difference. As I continue to experience the power of small acts of kindness, I've begun to notice something deeper. Kindness is not just a way to uplift others, but also a means of self-reflection. The more we give, the more we realize that kindness is not just about external actions, but about our own internal state. It forces us to slow down, to connect with others, and, in turn, to reconnect with ourselves. When I think back to the most significant moments in my life, the ones that have stayed with me, I realize they aren't always tied to grand events. It's the simple moments, the everyday acts of kindness that have left the deepest marks. Whether it was a random stranger who smiled at me when I was feeling low or a friend who offered a listening ear during a time of need, these moments hold far more significance than I ever gave them credit for. What I've come to understand is that kindness creates a ripple effect, both for the recipient and for the giver. It nurtures a sense of belonging, reminding us that we are all interconnected, and that even the smallest gesture can make a difference. I remember a time when I was going through a difficult period in my life, struggling with personal challenges and feelings of isolation. One day, I was walking through the park, head down, lost in my own thoughts. I wasn't paying attention to much of anything, just trying to get through the day. Then, out of nowhere, a young woman approached me. She was walking her dog, a cheerful golden retriever, and as she passed, she stopped and smiled at me. It wasn't a forced smile, it was genuine. And she said, "Have a wonderful day," with such warmth that it felt like the words came straight from her heart. It was nothing major, but in that moment, it felt like a beam of light breaking through my clouded thoughts. Her simple kindness shifted something in me. For a moment, I wasn't consumed by my own struggles. I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone who saw me, someone who cared enough to offer a moment of kindness. And it made all the difference. That moment was a turning point for me, because it made me realize that kindness doesn't have to come from someone who knows you well. You don't need to be intimately connected with someone for your kindness to matter to them. Sometimes, a kind word from a stranger, a smile, a compliment, or even a small act of consideration, can have an impact that lasts much longer than expected. It's these simple moments that, over time, build the foundation of a more compassionate and caring world. As I began to pay more attention to the kindness around me, I started to see it everywhere. People, in their own subtle ways, were constantly offering help, support, and understanding. The neighbor who helped carry my groceries when I had a heavy load, the colleague who offered to cover my shift when I was feeling overwhelmed, or the stranger who helped me navigate through a crowded street, all of these small gestures reminded me that kindness is a part of the fabric that holds us all together. But the most powerful thing I've learned is that kindness isn't just about what you do for others, it's about the way it transforms you as well. When we extend kindness, we open ourselves to the world. We allow ourselves to connect with people, to show vulnerability, and to offer a piece of ourselves to those around us. And in doing so, we find that kindness not only heals others, but it also heals us. I've come to believe that kindness is a form of resilience. In a world that can sometimes feel overwhelming and unpredictable, being kind is a way of reaffirming our humanity. It's a way of saying that, despite the chaos, we are still capable of caring for one another, of offering support, of showing empathy. Kindness isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It takes courage to offer help when you feel like you don't have much to give, to show compassion when the world feels indifferent. But it is precisely in those moments, when kindness seems hardest to offer, that it has the most profound impact. And kindness isn't always about solving someone else's problems. Sometimes, it's simply about being present. I've learned that listening can be just as powerful as doing. There have been times when people in my life have shared their struggles with me, and I haven't had the answers to make things better. But simply being there, offering a listening ear, or offering words of encouragement, can create a space where they feel heard, supported, and understood. In those moments, I've realized that kindness is often about acknowledging someone else's experience, validating their feelings, and offering them a safe place to express themselves. These small acts of kindness, whether big or small, continue to shape my life in ways I never could have imagined. They remind me of the importance of connection, of being present for others, and of showing up when it matters most. They remind me that we all carry burdens, that we all face struggles, but that we don't have to carry them alone. The simple act of kindness creates bonds, and those bonds are the threads that hold us together in the face of life's challenges. And as I continue to reflect on kindness, I realize that I want to be more intentional about it. I want to show up for the people in my life, and for the strangers I meet along the way. I want to live in a way that reflects the kindness that has been shown to me, and I want to create a ripple effect that extends far beyond what I can see. Because kindness, like a stone thrown into a pond, creates ripples that spread outward, touching lives in ways we can never fully comprehend. As I look back on the small acts of kindness that have shaped my life, I'm reminded of how essential it is to make kindness a priority, not just for ourselves, but for the world we live in. We live in a time when it's easy to become overwhelmed by negativity, whether it's in the news, social media, or the stresses of daily life. It can feel like the weight of the world is pushing us down, but kindness, even in its smallest forms, is a powerful antidote to that heaviness. In a world full of distractions, it's easy to forget how much power we hold in our interactions with others. A smile, a few words of encouragement, an unexpected compliment, these are not trivial things. They can change someone's day, alter their perspective, and sometimes, even shift the course of their life. I think back to those moments in my life when a small act of kindness made a world of difference. I remember a time when I was in a particularly tough spot, emotionally and mentally. Everything seemed to be falling apart, and I couldn't see a way forward. It felt like I was stuck in a constant state of stress, unable to escape the noise in my mind. One afternoon, I was walking through the park when I passed a man sitting on a bench. He was older than me, his clothes worn but neat, and he had a gentle, weathered face. I didn't know why, but something about him struck me. Maybe it was the way he seemed content, or perhaps it was just that quiet energy he exuded. I walked past him, but before I could get too far, he looked up and smiled. "You look like you could use some sunshine," he said. The words were simple, but they hit me in a way I wasn't expecting. In that moment, I realized how much I had been caught up in my own worries, how much I had been ignoring the small joys of life. I smiled back, nodded, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of relief. I sat down on the bench next to him, and we talked for a few minutes about the weather, life, and how quickly time passes. It wasn't an earth-shattering conversation, but for me, it was everything. That man didn't change my life in any dramatic way. He didn't fix my problems or offer me a solution to my struggles. But his simple act of kindness, a smile, a few kind words, reminded me that I wasn't alone in the world. That connection, however brief, was enough to lift my spirits, to make me remember that sometimes all we need is someone to acknowledge our existence. Sometimes all we need is a reminder that we are seen, that we matter. In the years since that encounter, I've made it a point to pay it forward, to offer those small moments of connection to others whenever I can. Whether it's a quick chat with a stranger, a thoughtful gesture to a friend, or a word of encouragement to a colleague, I've learned that kindness is an infinite resource. It doesn't run out. The more we give, the more we receive in return. And that's one of the most beautiful aspects of kindness, it creates a cycle that keeps giving. The person who receives kindness is more likely to pass it along, creating a ripple effect that touches more and more lives. And in that way, small acts of kindness have the power to transform communities, to build bridges where there were none before, and to create a world that is more compassionate and caring. I've also come to realize that kindness doesn't always have to be directed toward others. Sometimes, the most important kindness we can show is to ourselves. For years, I had a tendency to be my own harshest critic. I would hold myself to impossible standards, constantly pushing myself to do more, to be more. But over time, I've learned that part of being kind to others is also being kind to myself. It's about recognizing my own worth, treating myself with compassion, and allowing myself the grace to make mistakes. After all, if we can't show kindness to ourselves, how can we truly show it to others? In my later years, I've come to understand that kindness is also about patience. Patience with others, of course, but also with the process of life itself. We all have our own journeys, our own timelines, and it's easy to become frustrated when things aren't moving as quickly as we'd like. But sometimes, life has its own rhythm, and the key is learning to go with the flow. I've learned that the more patient we are, the more we allow space for kindness to grow. When we rush, we miss the opportunity to connect, to listen, and to truly see the people around us. But when we slow down, when we approach life with a sense of openness and patience, kindness becomes an effortless part of our daily lives. Looking back, I realized that the small acts of kindness I've experienced, and those I've been able to give, have had an immeasurable impact on my life. They've shaped who I am, how I interact with others, and how I navigate the world. And I've learned that, in a world that can sometimes feel divided, kindness is a bridge that connects us all. It doesn't matter where we come from, what we believe, or what we have. Kindness is universal. It transcends boundaries, and it speaks a language that everyone understands. As I move forward in life, I carry these lessons with me. I know that the world can sometimes feel overwhelming, but I also know that by practicing kindness, we can make it a better place, one small act at a time. As I've moved further along in life, I've begun to understand the true depth of the impact small acts of kindness can have, not just on the people we help, but on ourselves, on our communities, and on the world at large. It's easy to overlook these small moments of kindness, to dismiss them as inconsequential, but I've come to believe that they are the quiet forces that shape the world in profound ways. One of the most surprising things I've learned about kindness is its ability to heal. It's easy to think that healing comes from big changes, dramatic events, monumental shifts, but in my experience, healing often happens in the smallest, quietest moments. I think back to the times when I felt the weight of grief, loss, or pain. During those times, it wasn't the grand gestures or the words of wisdom that helped me heal. It was the simple acts of kindness that showed up in my life, those moments when someone reached out with a kind word, a gentle touch, or a listening ear. Sometimes, these acts didn't even need to be words at all, simply knowing that someone cared, that someone saw my pain and was willing to share a moment with me, made all the difference. There was a time in my life when I was going through a period of mourning. It felt like the world had lost its color, like everything was muted and gray. I was struggling to move forward, to get past the loss, but nothing seemed to bring me relief. It wasn't until a friend of mine, someone I hadn't seen in years, reached out with a simple message, "I'm thinking of you, and I'm here if you need to talk or just sit in silence." That message, so simple yet so powerful, made me realize that kindness doesn't always have to solve the problem. Sometimes, it's enough to just show up, to let someone know they aren't alone, to create a safe space for them to process their feelings. I've realized that kindness, in its purest form, is about presence. It's about being there for others without expecting anything in return, without trying to fix their problems, but simply showing them that they are not alone in their struggles. It's a reminder that we are all in this together, and that, despite the challenges we face, we are connected by our shared humanity. I've found that the more we are present for each other, the more we understand the depth of kindness and its ability to heal. The most powerful thing about kindness, though, is how it transcends time and space. I've had moments in my life when someone's kindness, even if brief or small, stayed with me for years. There's a moment I'll never forget, a random act of kindness that took place decades ago, when I was struggling in a new city, feeling out of place and disconnected. I had just moved to town and was adjusting to my new life when an elderly woman at a grocery store smiled at me and asked if I needed help finding something. She didn't know me. She didn't know that I had just left my family, that I was feeling alone, or that I was navigating a world that felt unfamiliar. But her kindness, her simple act of acknowledging me, made all the difference in that moment. I walked out of that store feeling like I belonged, as though I wasn't just some stranger in a crowd. Her act of kindness, though small, gave me the strength to face the next challenge and the next, knowing that the world still had kindness in it. These moments don't just fade with time. They become part of us, part of our foundation. When I think back to that moment with the elderly woman, I realize that it wasn't the groceries I needed, it was connection. It was a reminder that no matter how much we may feel lost or disconnected, there is always someone out there, willing to offer kindness, even if it's in the simplest way. As I reflect on my life, I've come to understand that kindness is a way of being. It's not just something we do, it's who we are, or at least, it's who we can choose to be. Kindness isn't a trait that only a few possess. It's something that lives within all of us, something that can be nurtured and grown. It's about being aware of the world around us, noticing when someone needs help, when someone needs a kind word or a smile, and taking the opportunity to offer what we can. The more I focus on kindness, the more I see how it's woven into the very fabric of our lives. It's in the way we greet each other, the way we listen, the way we offer our time, our help, and our love. The more we make kindness a priority, the more we see its impact, not just in the lives of others, but in our own lives as well. Kindness enriches our relationships, strengthens our communities, and creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond what we can see. So, as I move forward in life, I try to keep kindness at the forefront of my mind. I don't always get it right, and there are times when I fail to be as kind as I should be, but I try. I try to be present for others, to offer help, to listen, and to make this world a little bit warmer, one small act of kindness at a time. Because in the end, I've learned that kindness is what makes life meaningful. It's the glue that holds us all together, the force that makes the world a brighter, more connected place. As I reach the final chapter of my reflections on the power of small acts of kindness, I realize that kindness, in its simplest form, is a gift we all have the ability to give. It doesn't require extraordinary talent or deep resources. It only requires presence, empathy, and the willingness to care for others, no matter how small the gesture. As I look back on the many moments where kindness made a difference in my life, I find myself filled with gratitude, for the kindness I've received, for the kindness I've been able to give, and for the ripple effect that kindness continues to create in the world. There's one last moment that stands out for me, a moment when I saw the full circle of kindness in action. I was sitting at a cafe one morning, just reading a book, sipping my coffee, and enjoying the quiet of the early day. The sun was just rising, casting a warm glow through the windows. As I sat there, I noticed a young man at the counter who seemed to be having trouble with his wallet. He looked like he was in his 20s, and he was clearly flustered. He was trying to pay for his coffee, but his card wasn't working, and he looked embarrassed as he fumbled to find cash in his wallet. Without thinking, I stood up and walked over to him. I offered to pay for his coffee, just like someone had done for me many years ago when I was struggling. I didn't know his story, but in that moment, I saw someone who was in need of a small act of kindness. He looked up at me, surprised, and then broke into a smile, thanking me profusely. We exchanged a few words, and as I walked back to my seat, I felt something shift in me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the connection, the simple act of showing someone that they weren't alone, that there were people who still cared, even in the most mundane moments. Later that day, as I thought back to that interaction, I realized something significant. The kindness I had shown was part of a larger cycle, a chain that began with someone else's small act of kindness many years ago. I remembered the woman at the grocery store who had smiled at me when I was feeling lost, the elderly man in the park who had offered me a few kind words when I needed them most. All of these moments, these seemingly insignificant acts of kindness, had woven a thread through my life, leading me to this moment where I could pass it forward to someone else. It wasn't just one act, it was a web of kindness, stretching across time, touching people, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond anything I could see. That's the thing about kindness, it doesn't stop with us. It's passed from one person to the next, spreading like a wave, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. When we're kind to someone, they're more likely to be kind to others. And in that way, kindness becomes a force that shapes the world, one small act at a time. It may seem like a drop in the ocean, but over time, those drops can create a wave of compassion, understanding, and connection. As I reflect on all of this, I realize that kindness is one of the most important lessons we can learn in life. It teaches us patience, empathy, and the importance of being present for others. It reminds us that we don't have to solve all the world's problems or make huge sacrifices to make a difference. Sometimes, the most profound impact we can have is by simply showing up for someone, offering them a word of encouragement, or helping them carry their burden for a moment. And while I've been the recipient of kindness many times throughout my life, I've also learned that kindness is something we can choose every day. We can choose to be present for others, to show up in their lives, and to be a source of light and warmth, no matter how small the gesture. We can choose to make the world a little bit brighter, one act of kindness at a time. It doesn't require much, just a willingness to open our hearts and offer something genuine, something real, to those around us. In the end, the power of small acts of kindness is not in their size, but in their ability to connect us to each other. They remind us that we are not alone, that we are all part of this human experience, and that even the smallest moments of compassion can have a lasting impact. As I continue on my journey, I hope to keep offering kindness in whatever way I can, because I know that in doing so, I'm not just making a difference in the lives of others. I'm making a difference in my own life, too. And that, I believe, is the true power of kindness.